We've all witnessed moments like a bride tossing a bouquet at a wedding, or a child blowing out candles on a birthday cake. And hopefully you don't mix those up. Otherwise, a bride is throwing a kid right at a cake. Traditions like these are woven into the fabric of modern life, but many of the traditions themselves aren't modern at all. In fact, they go way back. So, today we're going to take a look at the surprising origins of some popular traditions. But before we get started, be sure to subscribe to the Weird History channel. After that, leave a comment and let us know what other traditions you would like to hear about. And now, in the tradition of all our previous videos, here's some weird history. Blowing out candles on a birthday cake and watching your friends mumble their way through that song might be one of the most ubiquitous experiences in modern life. That's because, at least according to one theory, birthday candles come to us from the same people who brought you Western philosophy and Euros, the ancient Greeks. Yes, there is evidence that Greeks offered cakes called amios to Artemis, the goddess of hunting, as a birthday ritual, and even incorporated candles that symbolized the stars and moon into the event. The cakes were placed in a temple to Artemis. Then the Greeks made a wish and extinguished the candles, working under the assumption that the smoke from the blown-out candle would carry the prayers up to the gods. Too bad they didn't have those cool pneumatic tubes you see in some offices. The tradition was handed down to the Romans, who presented celebratory cakes to non-deities, because their deities probably preferred ice cream or pie. And the tradition was handed down from there. For example, when medieval and early modern Germans started celebrating children's birthdays, they presented a youngster with a cake in the morning with candles that stayed lit through the day until they were blown out with a wish. Sehr gut. Incidentally, research shows that blowing out candles on a cake creates 14% more bacteria on the cake itself, thanks to all that spittle. Have fun thinking about that the next time you eat a slice of office birthday cake. It's impossible to imagine living in modern society without the option of giving people the finger. And that's because the practice has, once again, been with us since the days of ancient Greece. Though the popular read between the lines variation is 100% USA, baby. What's particularly amusing is that the ancient Greek finger wasn't just a crude gesture thrown around by the crass lower class. In fact, one of the first recorded uses of the middle finger as an insult was by the Greek philosopher Diogenes, who threw up the fingy to display his dislike of the orator Demosthenes. Could you imagine how much more popular philosophy classes would be in college if that was on the syllabus? Finally, worth noting is that in some countries, like Afghanistan, Iran, and Iraq, giving someone a thumbs up is equal to flipping the bird back in the US. As you might imagine, this has created more than a few sticky situations for American travelers, who are just trying to tell the locals they're doing a good job. Read between the lines, guys. Wait, not like that. Is there anything more romantic than seeing a bride toss her bouquet at the end of her wedding? Well, it might seem less romantic if people realized those brides are basically reenacting a move that the women of yesteryear used to dodge an attack. So it was less "I do" and more "No, you don't." In medieval Europe, it was common practice for single women to chase down the bride and rip keepsakes off her dress. The bride would be left in bits and pieces of what she was married in, and probably regretting some of the guest list. At that point in history, the bridal garment was seen as a good luck fertility charm for single women. However, the materials and labor to create a wedding dress eventually became more expensive, and brides became increasingly less willing to have their clothes torn from their newly married bodies. So to create a distraction and prevent guests from ripping the bride's dress apart, objects were thrown, one of which was the bouquet, which also symbolized fertility, but cost a lot less money. Meanwhile, the groom just stood there and sort of smiled. Come on, man, you can't run a simple zone defense? So many of Queen Victoria's cultural innovations are still with us today. It's almost like her ghost is still with us, metaphorically. Although, Ghost Queen does sound like a great movie. Take, for example, the white wedding dress. Prior to Queen Victoria's 1841 wedding, it was common practice for brides to wear bright, colorful dresses they could use again for other occasions. And if a woman was to wear white on her wedding day, it was to show off their wealth. The message being that the bride's family could afford to have the dress cleaned, which was a huge deal back then. Heck, Cleaning a wedding dress still ain't cheap today. But Queen Vicky, the 21-year-old bride, chose to wear white to highlight the delicate lace of her gown, and not to signify purity, as is popularly believed. Victoria also insisted that no one else wear white to the wedding, aside from her bridesmaids, starting another trend still in practice today. Like we said, Ghost Queen. The term coffin and casket are often used interchangeably, so you might be surprised to learn they're actually different things. A coffin is six-sided and tapers from the top to the bottom, while a casket is four-sided and rectangular in shape. Now you know, and knowing is half the battle. Just try not to perish in that battle. In the 17th century, coffins were typically reserved for the wealthy. Poor families would simply bury their dead in a shroud or winding sheet, casting some serious doubt on poet John Donne's assertion that death comes equally to us all and makes us all equal when it comes. Of course, the big question is, why were caskets invented if coffins are practically the same thing? Well, caskets began replacing coffins as part of a larger trend to beautify death during the American Civil War, which took the lives of an estimated 750,000 soldiers and an unknown number of civilians. It was kind of a big deal. The brutality of the Civil War led people to break with traditional rituals and imagery. Coffins were traditionally plain and made of wood, whereas caskets could be decorated and made from a number of materials. So the casket became more prevalent as an effort to pay respect to the deceased and distance mourners from death in a more honorable and pleasant manner. While we're on the topic of the Civil War, if not for that particular conflict, it is unlikely that embalming would have become as popular as it did in the US, and may have remained solely a practice for preserving medical specimens. Also, you should never drink the fluid, no matter how much it looks like Kool-Aid. Embalming first became popular after an Army Medical Corps colonel became the first Union officer to be slain in the war. Upon hearing about his demise, mortician Thomas Holmes embalmed the colonel and took him to the White House to be displayed for President Abraham Lincoln and his family and friends. Soon after, many embalmers began to advertise their wares, partially because people seemed to be comforted by increased time with their loved one's body, and partially because there was a metric ton of money to be made from those who perished during the Civil War. Hey, the free market is gonna free market. Holmes alone embalmed around 4,000 soldiers at $100 a body. That's $400,000, which in 1865 is the 2023 equivalent of about $7.5 million. Guess you can take it with you. Flowers are commonplace at funerals, on caskets, tombstones, and in the front gardens of the funeral home itself. But while they're merely traditional and decorative today, they served a very important purpose before funeral practices like embalming and refrigeration became commonplace, masking the stench of a decaying body. Sorry, hope you're not eating right now. Yes, funeral home directors would often strategically drape flowers over a coffin or casket to ensure the guests at a funeral did not smell the deceased as they ripened past their expiration date. So in this case, stop and smell the roses is a warning, not metaphorical advice. A famous example of this practice was at the 1874 funeral of President Andrew Jackson. President Jackson's body was not embalmed, so when the day of his funeral arrived, his body had already begun to return to the earth. To preserve the president's dignity and ensure the guests weren't tossing their cookies all over the presidential service, President Jackson's casket was closed and piled high with fragrant flowers. We imagine all in attendance were grateful. People have worn black as a symbol of mourning for thousands of years, and it's believed the tradition dates back to ancient Rome. Surviving texts from the era contain the earliest recorded mention of black being used for mourning, referred to as the toga pula, or dark toga. It was the somber, more tasteful version of a toga party. In the Middle Ages and Renaissance era, black clothing continued to signify loss by royals and aristocrats. Additionally, in a few European countries, widowed women were expected to wear black for the rest of their lives, like Batman. Black mourning clothing became a widespread pattern during, you guessed it, the Victorian era. After the unfortunate passing of her husband, Queen Victoria went into mourning and wore black clothes every day for 40 years until her own demise. Her choice began the trend, and soon after, Many began wearing black after the death of a loved one, with widowed women wearing black for approximately 2 to 3 years, which is still a pretty long time, but sure beats having to do it for the rest of your life. So what do you think? Which of these popular traditions have you practiced? Let us know in the comments below, and while you're at it, check out some of these other videos from our weird history.